All right, we're live. Great. Hey, Hassan, it's really nice having you here today. Super excited about this talk. Today I'm talking to Hassan Kadbi, and he's the CEO of Hapimag. I'm super excited to talk to you. We've known each other for a while now, but we haven't talked in a long time. And I'm super excited to catch up and dive into the topic of today, and especially also your story, because I really, really like the story that you have to tell about, your career and your past so far. Yeah, super excited to dive in, Hassan.
Cool.
So
Thanks.
yeah, my pleasure. So let's go right into the essence of the topic of today. So just as a first question, like if you had to sum up your essence as in terms of who you are in just one word, what would that word be and why?
Yeah, great. So for me, actually, that word would be passion. Because, like passion is without a doubt really a driving force. And, in reality, of course, passion is often like gets caught up in the conflict between like loss of control because you're absolutely dedicated and rational thinking or calculation. So actually, passion is not a permanent state of mind, and it is almost impossible to be constantly passionate about every single subject, but you need to always find ways to activate yourself and direct your intrinsic motivation in such a way that you can really make the best use of it. But at the same time, you really need to ensure that colleagues around you activate their passion too, so that at the end it really works because you combine power. So like, having said that, you still have to be careful, very careful with passion, because there's a saying actually from a poet that says, rest in reason and move in passion. So passion becomes a problem when you act exclusively with it. So when it comes to sound business decisions, it all boils down to the balance between passion and reason. And I also think, because you asked why, I also think that passion is essential to for change. So we live in a time that is characterized by change, and change is often painful. Driving and implementing change requires strength and stamina, perseverance and courage. And without passion, there's a lack of stamina, and without perseverance, there will be no long-term really success. So passion, I would say.
Thank you for sharing. I love that. And from how I know you, that's definitely a great word to describe, you and how you act in the world and how you show up and how you drive things forward. So I think it's a a very good choice. Let's talk about success. What's your personal definition of success? How would you define it for yourself?
Um, I think the definition of success really varies dramatically based on how you look at it, right? So do you look at it from a business perspective, or do you look at it from a life perspective? I think those are two different things. Then your stakeholders completely change. If you're looking from a different perspective, your measurement of success changes, and even your definition might even change as you progress in this. So also time, I think, affects it. So like in business, you might be considered successful when you save a company, when you make a company grow, when you sell a company, when you create jobs, sometimes when you reduce jobs. So it's quite contradictory if you really think about it, how success might be measured. And most of the time, business success is associated mainly with financial success and growth. However, this changing, not fast enough though, and I truly hope it becomes more and it accelerates more, and we reach the point where business success really balances, financial success with responsibility, really towards our world and towards humanity. That there's a balance. You need the financial success, but not only. And then if you look at it, let's say from your life, from a life perspective, you might be considered successful based on your impact on others, and on your impact on your own life, and but this again somehow might be contradictory. Take for example a billionaire, take a war general, take a religious leader even. Their impact on people around them is sometimes the exact opposite to this on the other side of the transaction. So this makes the definition, I think, of success very subjective. So therefore, and I it's not that I don't want to answer your question, but I don't think I can really define success in an objective way, and not sure if it's even needed, to be quite frank. I would rather approach it from a different perspective. And as you cover the topic of leadership, that's basically what you're interested in. Um, I would rather approach this from a different perspective and say, um, you know, maybe in today's world, a successful leader is a leader who would consider to near an approach that is based on servant leadership, an inclusive, a facilitating way of leadership, and so on and so forth. I mean, the definition is of servant leadership. There's a lot of material on it, so we don't need to dig deep into it. But I would, maybe answer your question in that way.
Okay, thanks for sharing. I really appreciate a different perspective on it as well. And I want to stick with that topic for a moment when it comes to leadership, because it's a question I wanted to ask you anyway. So let's dive right into that. I mean, you already went into a little bit by using the word servant leader, but I'm just curious to dive into more. Like, for you personally, what makes a great leader?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think this is a topic that I felt in the last years throughout my work also has been a topic that developed quite a lot, specifically based on the expectations of people around us and their um, level of engagement in work, and what work means to them, because obviously we're talking now in the context of business. So I'm convinced that really good leadership starts with people and not with organizational goals. So the demands from companies and then thus from leaders constantly are increasing. Every coming generation demands more, because it actually had more from the beginning, be it access to information, social stability, whatever you have. Different countries, different environments might offer different levels of this, but definitely demands are greater. Then we are in an era where the question of why is asked much more often than before. People around the leader see things that he or she does not see, and sometimes make demands that she or he do not have. So it's essential that these colleagues get a working culture that allows for this to flow, so it helps a company develop. Then we at the same time we're living in an incredibly exciting time. I would say exciting to look at it positively. So in the old days, it would have been, for example, unthinkable for a leader to stand up and say, hey, I made a mistake, or I make mistakes. Nowadays, this not only it builds trust among colleagues, but it actually also inspires them. And so let's say if I were to summarize some traits that I would consider essential for good leadership in today's world, in addition, of course, to the classical things such as having the vision, driving a strategy, like all those things, I would go for things that come up quite often from what I've seen recently, is the topic of values. That a leadership shows that in leadership a leader shows show their values, that they communicate them clearly, and that they really stand by them, no matter what the consequence or the costs are. Then listening, and listening, it's a tricky thing, right? Because there's listening and listening. So to listen, it has nothing to do with the like cognitive processing. Paying attention to someone is far from really understanding something. So I would say active listening begins much earlier. before the actual, act of listening starts. Meaning, it contains also elements of trust, of empathy. So listening meaning also picking up on what is not said as well, and not only what is said. So listening is a trait or a skill that I believe really is required today. Then creating climate where people can open up and feel comfortable. Trust is very important. Otherwise, issues that are critical for the company, for the business, might just be ignored or swept under the carpet. And so if nobody dares to be honest and tell the truth, you won't be tackling the right problems. So you really have to cultivate this climate if you want to make a change in leadership. And then, I think whoever leads needs to also feel the responsibility and know how important it is. This is like a big deal, and need to be ready for the burden of, or the challenge of interpersonal communication. Somehow you need to be able also to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. You need to be able to interpret things from their point of view and not only yours. And you need to be able, like, to talk to them, to encourage them to talk. And that's why you probably need a very high level of empathy. So empathy is actually a genuine characteristic of us humans, a competitive advantage, I would say, that we have until now over robots. But we often forget it. And I'm actually the first one to forget how important expressing empathy is. Not just being empathetic, but really being able to express it. And maybe last thing I would say is to lead by example, but also by failure. So that means, like, as a leader, you should always act in an exemplary manner. But it also means that if you made mistakes yourself, you should communicate them openly and not really get wrap yourself into the cloak of moral superiority, because I'm a leader. Maybe it doesn't reflect good. But really to set the right example. And when making mistakes, we as humans, as people, as employees, we bear consequences, we learn from them, and we keep going. And as we keep, and maybe the very last thing, which is hopefully it won't be forever, as we seem to keep running from one crisis into the other, I think leadership today requires to be able to handle crisis. And by handling crisis, I don't mean to be able to manage crisis. I mean to be able to ensure that the company they are managing is still thinking and working beyond crisis throughout the whole crisis mode. Not that it becomes daily business to just manage crisis, because if it's a month, 2, 3, it's okay. But if it's 3 years of crisis, it's not healthy to only manage crisis. So I would say, that's what I would look at currently if I was working on, developing my leadership skills.
Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate that we went so much into detail of those different traits and those different perspectives. Now I want to talk a little bit about the industry, hospitality and the future and the status quo. And I remember reading an article that you wrote, I think about airlines, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of months ago, I think. And it really sparked something in me where, on the one side, I just love the way you wrote it. You didn't hold back. It's just like you're expressing your I think your purest opinion and perspective. And that's something I really, really appreciate about you. And, something that you always, I always look up to you when it comes to these things. I love how transparent and how open you communicate. And I want to dive a little bit more into the topic of the future, but also the status quo. So let's talk hospitality today. What's the status quo, and where do you see the future going in that industry, in that sector?
Yeah. Hospitality, the status quo varies quite a bit across the industry, depending where you are with hospitality. Because, hospitality for me is whether you give information at an information desk at an airport, or you welcome someone into a resort, or whether you serve someone in a restaurant. All this is what we call hospitality, right? Hospitality is when you offer a welcoming service to someone who comes to to you seeking a product or a service, be it even a question. So I think it varies quite a lot. Some areas have a difficulty, some have it difficult, some areas have it easy. At the moment, some benefited a lot from the crisis. Some, of course, had to fight the crisis. So I think the status quo today, saying let's after COVID, but with the current instability in the in Europe as a region, still continues slightly, and you see it with you know. Mainly with costs. So basically, the biggest, I think, at the moment challenge for our industry overall is how to handle the rising costs that impact every area, impact the spending capacity of people, impact the cost of production or the cost of service or the cost of sale, whatever you want to call it, as well as the energy cost and the potential worry that there might be energy shortages. It's unlikely that this winter will see energy shortages, but it's a challenge. And of course, the increases in the prices of the energy. So I think at the moment that's a very big challenge to manage as in the status quo. The second thing that has spilled all over the industry is the what is referred to often as the Great Resignation, which is really people dropping out of the hospitality industry and wanting to work in other industries. It happened mainly during COVID time. So finding skilled people in the industry is becoming very, very challenging. And it's also because perhaps our industry has not been very rewarding, neither financially nor, I would say, fulfilling to a certain extent, because we did not pay attention, maybe enough attention to it as an industry. And that is really showing now. Now we see, of course, the symptoms, but the problem is deeper than that. We really need to rethink this whole thing. I don't believe COVID is the reason. COVID was only the trigger. So those are two areas where I think, fighting for the right pricing through cost management and staffing are really two big issues under status quo. So so I would say, coming back to your question about the future, like anything I say about the future is nothing more than really how do you say, a speculation, call it this way, right? And no one has a crystal ball to tell this. And obviously, when we make prognosis about the future, we often base it on what we know today. It's very difficult to take into consideration what happens around you that could change completely the situation. So our world changes so fast that something that might make total sense as the next thing to happen can totally change because of like dramatic developments that come to market extremely fast, be it war affecting supply chain, be it a startup that scales up so quickly and disrupts a whole industry. So I think those are things, there's a sea of information you have to fish from. So I'm not sure you can really foresee into the future. It gets more and more difficult, I think, when it comes to this. So I would be inclined to probably list to you 4 or 5 points that I think are quite important, or that I expect them to be important in the next few years in our industry. I think employment concepts and standards require total reform, require total different thinking. Then the generation we are after as our main workforce requires cause, requires values, requires feedback, requires empathy, requires people who care for their well-being. And we're in an industry, you work in the evenings, you work on weekends, you work when everybody else is on holidays. This is the hospitality industry, right? So it requires even more of that. Then transparency in communication is becoming more and more important. You need to be authentic. You cannot only talk marketing. Marketing is needed, but you cannot talk only marketing. Inclusion of your customer is very important. So becoming more customer centric, doing more iterations when you offer a service or a product. You give equal importance to modern ways of product development and operations. Some companies might take it to extremes on either side. I think there needs to be a good balance. the digital landscape, that comes without saying, front and back end. And front end, obviously, for everything you need to offer your customers. Back end is getting very complicated because you need applications that help you do your job, but you have the issue of cybersecurity, you have the issue of data protection that become increasingly difficult, in an industry where actually, your knowledge and your communication, so your customer data, is quite important, to be able to improve your product. And sustainability and responsibility, also, we are a little bit behind on acting proactively as an industry overall. That shows that we really believe that our world matters, and we really need to do that. And with like hospitality and holidays, there is such a great opportunity to demonstrate this and bring this really to action without huge complications. Some part is of course difficult, requires investments and so on, but other part is doable, so you just need commitment. So that's what I would see in the bigger picture, for our industry to pay attention to over the next few years.
Thanks for sharing, like also about the status quo and how things are today, and also like the challenges, because it's beautiful to talk about a future and an ideal future, but at the same time there's also realistic challenges that are happening today, right? And I love that you put both of these parts into perspective. We talked a little bit about customer centricity. I just want to dive a little bit into the topic of customer experience. What do you believe makes great customer experience?
Yeah. So, a customer, probably the first thing is a customer-centric approach with which the customer is really included when developing and improving the product, not only afterwards. So basically trying to collect as much data as possible from customers, figure out their wishes, their pain points, and really work on this. Then I would say, specifically maybe to hospitality, the customer themselves play a very big role to help with this. Because companies often in hospitality industry, we have been very good at picking up opinions following the experience. So I think we need to find ways to pick up opinions before and during the experience. So when it's before, it would be an expectation. When it is during, it would be very emotion driven, because I'm in a resort, I'm happy, you ask me, you contact me. If I have an issue, you solve it, and not after I leave I write a complaint or whatever. So I believe if we do this, it will help us to deliver much better customer experience. And I think finding a balance between inspiration and data when you work on things that would improve your customer experience. So like I maybe take as an example us as a company. We turned 60 years old next year, so it's a company that's been around for a while. And actually, if I look at how we developed our customer experience in the past, was purely related on our drive, our inspiration, our opinions. And then we started working on becoming more customer centric, in the sense of on the part of collecting data, understanding the problems, and developing it in this sense. So now we have to really find the balance of how do we do both, because information from the customer helps you deliver stuff, but of course inspiration might not come automatically from a customer, because a customer might be thinking, going on holiday is not their full-time job, right? They have their own lives to do. Actually, making people happy on holiday is our full-time job. So we have a lot of more thinking capacity, and we can bring inspiration. So it's finding the balance. And I think all that, if you bring all of this together, you're able to offer a more a more successful customer experience.
Thanks for sharing. And I love the part specifically, in the hospitality sector, but everywhere. Like, sometimes it's so easy, like when there is a product or we're trying to improve a product and there's complaints or feedback, solving the issues, but forgetting to take it into the process of actually developing things further, or actually, solving, putting the plaster on the wound, right? Instead of making sure the wound hopefully goes away. And I love, what you shared there about including the customer maybe before the experience actually, right? But then also like during the experience and after the experience, not just solving the problem, but actually bringing that into the whole process of improving things. One more question before we dive into the final part, but you mentioned the digital landscape before, and I'm just curious about your experience so far and your perspective when you look at digital services, digital products surrounding the customer experience. In your experience, what makes or breaks these things? Like what makes or breaks digital services, digital products, digital experiences?
Yeah, so that's of course a big topic um, in general, and like the longer you are around as a company, the bigger the topic is. I mean, if you always start from zero, it's relatively easier to get your digital landscape right. When you have a legacy, it's always tougher, and it requires really a lot of stamina and a lot of determination, because the chances of companies failing at their digital transportation a couple of times before they get it right is actually quite high. So the question is, do you give up, or do you make sure you really achieve it at the end? So I think that's worth mentioning before. But I would say three things, Daniel, that would make or break a digital product, service, business experience, whatever you want to call it, is quality, functionality, and user friendliness. If you're able to deliver quality, if you're able to deliver the right functionality, if you're able to make it user friendly, then it makes it. It doesn't break it, because at the end of the day, being digital in the front end is not for the fun of it. Is to make the life of your customer easier. Being digital um, in the back end is basically to ensure that your systems run efficiently, effectively, that you are cyber safe, that you handle data properly, and that you are able to manage your processes, right? So it's not like let's be digital for the sake of digitalization. So I would say quality, functionality, and user friendliness. If this works, you're good. If it doesn't work, you start again, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. I have one more thing I want to talk to you about, like this balance. You mentioned balance a few times now, and you mentioned also like the customer centricity. And I'm just like curious, looking at customer experience and digital offerings or whatever it is, the balance between serving the customer and understanding the customer and making it customer centered, and making sure that the business goals or the business needs are covered as well. How do you find or manage that balance? Or is there even a balance? Or what's your perspective on that?
To be quite honest, I haven't really thought about this before from that perspective. I think if you focus on on the main, how do you say, pillars of running a business, that comes together automatically, because you know you're looking at having a strategy, following it through, implementing it, and then adjusting as you iterate and find out, okay, here I did something, or we did something as a company that did not take the traction or did deliver the result that we expected. How do we act then? But so that's an element that you really have to have a plan. Without a plan, you cannot really you cannot move a company forward without a plan, because you need everybody to pull in the same direction. So and then you adjust as you go. And then if where people really are able to to challenge, to deliver, and so on, then that's the element number two. Then happy, they are involved, and so on. So I think once you have your all this running together, um, it automatically come into balance, because remember, Daniel, it's not about a person, right? It's not about a leader, it's not about the CEO of the company, it's really about the team, right? So
Hassan?
Lose you. I
Oh,
think I
now
did
you're
lose
back.
you for a
There
while.
you go.
Yes,
Yes,
something must have happened with the connection. So I don't know where did we lose each other, but I was saying that it's not actually about one person, it's not about one leader, it's not about the CEO of a company, it's really about a team. It's about a group of people working together at all levels, and I think they create the balance and not the individual. So if it's not a one man show, one woman show, then it should work.
yes. Thanks for sharing. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm always curious about that. And there's lots of different perspectives, and I love the way you talked about it in a sense of like, I mean, what I heard is like if you focus on the customer and you know your business, there's not much to worry about. Like, it's kind of like it's organic. It's gonna have an impact, and I love that perspective. Last question that I have. I always love to ask it, and it's ways out into the future, but let's dive in. Let's say you're 80 years old now. You're sitting in your rocking chair or wherever you are then, and you look back at your life. You look back at how the world has been and how the world is today now. Looking back at that point in time, what would you love to see changed?
Since the question is very metaphorical and I'm not yet 80, maybe I also answer it this way of really what I truly, give you an answer that comes straight from the heart. I would love to see a world that is in a better shape than the one I got, really, from my perspective. And I think it's why I'm saying this, because I think it's the only way to pay forward to the new generation, and ask them to do the same. Um, and again, I bring here us as a company. We have a very clear vision. We say we want more happy people for a better world, and we truly, we really live it. We truly mean it, and I feel it very deeply, and I believe in it totally. So I would say a better world. And for me, a better world is not a world that is judged based on, say, profit or whatever. Profit is very important, but for me, really, how to judge a better world is a world that has really more happy people. Um, and not happy for a day when I'm 80 and I look backwards, but really happier for generations. Um, because that is, I think, what will bring us forward in humanity. Or I did lose you now, Daniel. So I don't know if
Yeah, it's a little bit shaky, the connection, but I
yeah.
think I think you're here. You can hear me still?
Yes. So I hope I had been able to answer your question.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that you gave the answer that is closest to your heart, because I think that's always the best one, and I love that. Thank you, Hassan. I really appreciate this conversation and taking the time to be here with us, and the everybody who's viewing it now and who's going to be watching it in the future. And yes, once again, Hassan, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon.
Yes, thanks a lot. And yeah, I mean, important maybe to just also say thank you to all the colleagues around me who actually inspire me to do my job. This is the truth. And for those who have not heard of us as Happy Mug, I really hope they take a minute to look at our website and maybe try us once, as we are a super interesting and responsible holiday concept for people to try. And we turned 60 next year. So looking forward to see more people joining us, joining our community.
Thank you, Hassan. Really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Have a nice afternoon. Thanks, Daniel.